Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 2. We are on page 1197. Okay. We're speaking about the subject of Chelas Ava, an expression from the book of Song of Songs, Shiur Ashirim, that was first mentioned in the end of last discourse. Chelas Ava Ani. Remember, we're talking about healing. So healing from what? From the Chelas Ava, this love, this aching and all-consuming love of Malchus, which longs to connect to the highest levels of the divine, Sevav Kalaman, and even higher than Sevav Amala. And in Avedas Adam, which is what we're discussing here, this is the neshama's yearning as it contemplates on that divine reality in face of which everything is nullified. So it creates this chelas ava. But the primary way one reaches this form of aching and longing, the true chelas ava, he said, this comes to riyah, the riyah in godliness. Because when you comprehend something, even though, yes, when you appreciate its value and its preciousness, you long for it, but the fact that you comprehend it is already some form of quenching the thirst. When you see something, the contrast is far stronger, because on one hand, you see it, you see the very entity, and at the same time, it doesn't quench anything. Like the pasuk he brings, that Ene Adam, does not satisfy. And on the contrary, the more you see it, the more you yearn and long for it. So the same thing in Elikus, there's the level of asagi, of understanding something. So there, he says, there you have some form, at least some type of satisfaction, at least you can contemplate on its beauty and on its greatness. But when you come to a state of riyah, which he says, like in the core soul, then you're only left with the longing, and thus it creates the deepest form of chelas ava, of this love sickness, of this whole being completely consumed and aching to connect with the thing you love. Okay. Now, in the parentheses, we learned that la'asid lavi, there's going to be an extraordinary phenomenon where riyah will come together with shuv. Here we're talking about today when you see something and you're able to experience and vision it and so relate to it in a way that's so close to you, but you cannot access it, you can't grasp it. So it creates the deep rotze, the deep yearning and thirst. L'asad love, you'll have both. You'll have riyah, but it will be in a way, in a form of shuv, and that's takapela, he says. And he compared it to what it says in the pasuk in Zechariah, that the wall, the container will be rishpei eish. So the rotze itself will be a form of shuv, as I explained yesterday. Okay. So we stop right after the parentheses in the middle of the page. That basically riyah creates this chelas ava. But let me just fill in a few things. I did have a chance to look up to some extent the sources where this is discussed in Chassidus earlier. And essentially, really, number one is this Maimer Samchuni Bashishes, which is the pasuk where it first says Chelas Ava that we read on page 1195. Those discourses, there's a Maimer Tovkuf Samach Gimel from the Alter Rebbe, and other discourses, Amarim from the Rabbi that come afterwards. The Mittler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Marash, and here the Rebbe Rashab. There it talks a lot about what we're going to be learning shortly. How do you come to the Samchuni Ba'ashishes? It says, sustain me with those flagons of wine and with the scent of the apples that we learned about. He says, that is because I'm chelas ava, ki chelas ava ani. So he explains that the chelas ava comes through riyah, sumar meinechem v'rumi bara ela, which we're going to be learning shortly. That's the essential essence. and talks about how Riyah creates this deep, deep longing, which therefore needs relief. And that's the request of Knesset Yisrael, the Neshama, asking, Malchus, asking, please relieve it, please sustain me. Please, in other words, quench my thirst and my longing and my aching. So this, clearly, what we're learning now is a continuation of Samchuni that we began learning in the previous Maimer, and it's actually in the Maimorim of Chassidus, it discusses it all together as Riyah. Another thing I found was actually an explanation from the Frierdiker Rebbe on this piece of this Maimer, the Tafresh Pei Beis, that would be 1922. The Frierdiker Rebbe said Maimorim and wrote Maimorim that were based on this piece in Ayin Beis. So remember, we did this at length, if you recall, with Tzadik Daled, how the Frierdiker Rebbe based Tzadik Daled, Tafresh Tzadik Daled, based on earlier Maimorim of Ayin Beis, the whole sugya of Yesh, Ayin, Yesh, and so on. And here, so we could learn it inside, but I'll just give you a brief summary. He does elaborate more. What does this mean that Riyah, seeing something, creates such longing? So I'm referring to right now, I'm looking at, this is Tafresh Pei Beis from the Frierdiker Rebbe. So in two Maimorim, he discusses this. One is in a Maimer from Nosei Tafresh Pei Beis, and he says the following. He adds explanation why Riyah creates such a. So he says the difference, and also explains the words that he says here, that tefus be'etzem hadavar. Remember, we learned yesterday that when it comes to Riyah, the expression he said was, what was the expression? Riyah hu be'etzem hadavar she'en above b'chinas tfisa mamish. And the nefesh emek ha-nefesh b'yeser. So Frierdiker Rebbe explains the difference between a chush and a koyach. He says a chush are the senses. The koyches are the faculties. So for example, the faculty of intelligence, or even the faculty of seeing with your eye, but as a faculty, not as a chush. I'll explain in a moment the difference. As a faculty, you contain it more. When you understand something, you grasp it. Chushim are far more, what he calls dakus, far more subtle. So the koyach hariyah is you see something from a point of view of you've seen something, that's satisfying. But the chush hariyah is the appreciation that comes through seeing something, the inner beauty, the factors that are the more subtle factors. Just like when you listen, you can listen to words, but the chush hashmiyah, that's the koyach hashmiyah, the power to hear. The chush hashmiyah is you appreciate, let's say, music. You're not just hearing the sound, you appreciate its beauty. And that level of appreciating beauty is not something we can hold on to and grasp. So when you look at something, if you're talking about, let's say, a witness, all he has to do is witness the event. He doesn't have to understand all the subtleties. But if you're looking at a piece of art or any other thing of beauty, the chush of it creates this two. On one hand, it's a far deeper experience, but on the other hand, you don't contain it as much, and therefore, havana v'asage, which is intelligence, is a koyach. You can, even though you're understanding and appreciating God is completely beyond us, but because it's a koyach, you get some satisfaction from understanding it. When it comes to Riyah, the opposite is true. The deeper you go in trying to appreciate it, the more it remains elusive, and therefore the more it creates that deep thirst and hunger and yearning and longing. That's essentially what he says in the Maimer here. He elaborates quite extensively about it. And he brings all this, basically explaining that pasuk, that when a person looks at something, and he says clearly a number of times, that with Riyah, the more you appreciate, the more you see it, the more the deeper the chelas ava, the deeper the longing and the aching for it. Okay. He also brought but the parenthesis.
It's reaching deeper in your nefesh, like the Rebbe Rashab said, reaching so deep, she'enoi mismalei b'shum oifon.
Yeah. He also brings the concept of la'asid lavei This, he also brings that, and he adds, does he add anything that's worthwhile mentioning? Let me see. He just elaborates that today, all the Riyah, in other words, the state of Riyah creates more longing. And the Osalove, the Rishpe Eish, he says clearly, the fire, the Rotze will be in a level of Shuv, okay, because of Zgal Sa'atzmus. Two opposites together, says that clearly. Okay, fine. But I haven't yet found the mimer where he says the difference between at the end of the parentheses between Hahergish, Ima Hergish, Belev, or B'mayach. Still need to do a little looking. I think I know where it is, but I have to still find it. Okay. So that's the additional explanation in this mimer from the Frierdiker Rebbe. Okay, and there's another mimer a little later where he says it again, in different words, but the same idea. Zeish Teresa Adam, a Chukas mimer that year. Let's see if he adds anything that I want to add here. He says, "Kamoy b'tzir na," like a beautiful image, a beautiful picture. The dover nechmad, and very tasteful, very precious. Kol masharoi yeshes hadover hana, einu merava eshe klal. The more he sees this beautiful thing, it does not quench his thirst for it at all. Adarabe, is gadol v'yisrachev tshukosei. His yearning for it grows and expands. V'chesav nafshei ba'adover. So he says, he continues, as we actually see in physical reality, that when a person gazes at something that's very, very nechmad, that's very dear to him, even though that as he gazes on it, he envisions it, it creates an image, like a snapshot, a picture of it in his mind, and in his insides. In other words, you're looking at it, you're like you see the image is being being like copied, or I would say the image is being engraved inside the person. What does that mean?
He is not removing his eyes from the thing. He's forgetting about everything else. He's so involved with this.
Exactly. He's so consumed with it that his eye does not, you like stare at it because he's so dear to him. That's what he's saying clearly. Forgets about everything else. So even though you could say, you know what? He can look away. He already has the image in his mind. So why do you keep staring at it? Because it so consumes him that he can't tear his eyes away. Like we say, I could not tear my eyes away from it. And the more he looks at it, he yearns and pines more. To the point that he completely is controlled, he completely absorbed, dissolves, and attached to that thing to the point that he doesn't even feel how he's lost himself. You see somebody who gets completely consumed, completely obsessed with something, the person doesn't even realize how obsessed they are. That's what he says.
Are you reading, Reb Simon? What are you reading now?
I'm reading, as I said, the Maimonim from Tafresh Pei Beis of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the same thing can be understood through, Riyah Belakus. When a person comes to gazing and seeing with their own eyes godliness, and we'll soon learn what that means. That causes a very increased yearning and pining. That's the language in Ayin Beis. Because Riyah, you're seeing the actual thing, and it's not just you're hearing about it, it's not just a reflection It's you're seeing the actual thing, and you cannot grasp it in any possible way. That etzem built in nitfus, he says. This is the Frierdiker Rebbe's additions to the Ayin Beis. Because etzem, you cannot grasp an etzem. You can grasp a reflection of it. And like Havana Vasaga, you understand it, and therefore you could have some satisfaction because you're not dealing with the etzem of it. As much as you understand, it's not something that you're seeing before your eyes, the very entity itself. And therefore it does not have that same doesn't consume the person quite that much. Whereas with Riyah, etzem built in it, so this is mamish an elaboration on the Ayin Beis. I'm glad I'm reading this. And that's why just like the etzem is something you can't grab, so also the effect on the person is one that ain't shum mili klal. He has no way to be fulfilled by it. In other words, you come close and you see something of that power. So yes, you're so what it does is it completely takes over, controls you, but there's no mili klal. And he says these are vazi banugen sechnish b'shum gili er. Because the etzem is not satisfied in any way in grasping the etzem and trying to appreciate the etzem. There's nothing that can satisfy in any possible way.
Where is it in Beis? In which page?
I'm reading page Shinun Vav, 356. And he says, "K'moshe kasav eretz le'sova mayim." The eretz uloshen rotzei. Here he adds, eretz is from the word yearning. That rotzei v'atiyuv da nefesh ine le'sova mayim. No amount of water can quench it. Its thirst is so deep. She'ein davar hamazbiyeh. There's nothing that can satisfy it. And on the contrary, looking at it actually makes you even thirstier and hungrier. He goes on, then he brings a medrash.
All this would not apply to Shmiya as well as Riyah, especially something like music, which there's nothing really to see, just to hear.
Riyah is more than music.
Shmiya has its power as well, but he's not talking about Shmiya. He's talking about Riyah. He's not talking about Shmiya. He's talking about either understanding or seeing. Does Shmiya have an element of this? It has a certain element of it. But in Shmiya, actually, I should say the following. But the pasuk doesn't say when a person hears something, they can't be quenched. Only when you see it, because when you hear music, you feel pleasure. You don't feel thirst. You feel pleasure. You're actually gaining it. It's entering into you. Here, the point is that you're seeing it and you can't really, so-called, contain it. So that's what I would say, that Shmiya does not have that element. On the Shmiya, on the contrary, when you listen to music, you're enjoying it and you feel very satisfied. When you see something, the thing is the opposite. You see it, but it's not yours, and it's not part of who you are. So therefore, the more you see, the more yearning it creates. That's how I would explain that.
Reb Simon, in Kundras Aveda from the Rebbe Rashab, he's talking there about in the opposite, a person that is having Re'iyah in a Dover or also, and he's telling himself he's cold, it's not Noigeya to him, he's not having a koch. So the Rebbe Rashab is explaining that the Re'iyah is Noigeya the Etzem HaNefesh.
It's not a contradiction. It's not a contradiction at all.
Okay, this is what he's saying here. That the not
it's not a contradiction because he's saying it's mitama the nefesh. If you're looking at a dover asur, even though let's say you're not acting on it, and you even feel a hunger and thirst, but the bottom line is you're mitama. That's not you're polluting your being. Yeah.
Right, because it's re'iyah. That's a nekuda that I want to bring out.
Okay, fine. But let's not confuse matters. It's here. The point is that when you're looking at something, it creates this thing. Then he brings a medrash. Interestingly, in this Maimer, and also I believe in the other Maimer, Isha Kasista. Amar Rab Levi, he gives a muscle from a medrash that there was Irini. a peasant. Irene is a peasant that married the daughter of kings, a princess. So a simple person married a daughter, a princess. This is a medrash. If you want to know what the medrash is, Vayikra Rabbah. On the pasuk Gam Hanefesh Lo Timale. She says like this: a mashal of a peasant, or Irene means a city dweller, married a commoner. That's the best expression. A commoner. Lokach bas melachim. Av shemachila kol madani elam. Even though he may feed her all the delights of the world, all the best foods, Eini yetze yedei chevase. Lama lefi shehi bas melachim. So if a commoner takes a princess, and even though he may feed her all the delights, he will never satisfy her because she's a daughter of a kings. Cain, kol ma sha'adam omer lo nafshi eini yetze yedei chevase. That's the mashal. Because shohim u'mayla v'tekev ratzei v'tshukah zebah de'avid ve'elam. Yeah, that you never get quenched. That's essentially what he says in this mimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Two maimarim, Nosei and Chukas Pei Beis, Tafresh Pei Beis. You can look it up. We can post it as well if you like. I don't know if we have to learn it inside. I already read, I think, the main part that's relevant to us. Yeah.
Rabbi Jacobson, when I
hold on, one second. Give me a minute, 1 second. Yeah. Now we're going to learn how you get to this level of Riyah. How do you come to such a level of gazing at something, which of course creates this deep aching and this deep complete consumption. By the way, I also looked up the medrash with Moshe, Vayechal Moshe. Yeah, it says clearly that he got so, it wasn't just Vayechal, his whole being was consumed with it. Literally, he became sick.
He became sick, yeah. Shishus, he lost his whole entire koya being.
Okay, go ahead, Eliezer. When I go to a museum, art museum, and I see a French Impressionist painting, when I leave the museum, I don't feel that I feel satisfied. I feel very full from that experience rather than, wow, my thirst is even more now than ever. How would you explain that? I mean, is that?
Well, let's I'm going to use a somewhat of an appropriate example. What about if it was a woman who was so beautiful and you gaze at her and just can't get your eyes off of her? Is also that same thing?
I don't think so. It's a different experience. It would be a different experience.
Why?
Maybe one is meant to be just to be gazed at, and the other one maybe because it has other attributes to it.
Exactly. Well, with Elikus, it's not just meant to be gazed at. You want to become encompassed. He says clearly, what is the thirst? The thirst is not to look at the painting. The thirst is to become one with it.
Uh-huh.
So with the painting, it probably doesn't apply that because there's no reason to become one with it. It's almost like, yes, it's more powerful perhaps than hearing or understanding it, comprehending it, but it doesn't have that muscle would not really be fitting. I think the muscle has to be where something that you want the experience of it. You know,
I was wondering when.
Let me give another example. Let's say you watch a video of the Rebbe. Let's talk something in Kedusha. You watch a video of the Rebbe and you can't get your eyes off the whole scene. And what happens? It creates a longing. I want to be with him. Yes, there is obviously, at least you're seeing it. But in a way, like Ritzeinu Liris Es Malkeinu. Fine, I got a video, I got a picture, but I don't have the thing itself, you know.
I understand that. That'll have to be like a car, looking at an amazing car. The car is meant to be experienced, to be driven, not to be looked at. So
right.
Looking
now, I would
at
say, even with the muscle you gave,
yes.
If indeed you wanted to, if it affected you, that you wanted to be there, that the experience touched you so much, you want to be there. Like just like you see a picture of your child, and you say, "Oh, wow, how beautiful! I see my child," but it creates a longing. You want to be with your child.
Right.
it has to have that element to fit what we're discussing here. That's pretty.
I see.
I was wondering when someone, I'm glad
I'll tell
Rabbi
you,
Jacobson.
one second. Let me just say one thing. Actually, there are people probably who actually like that. They look at God like a museum. It's a nice piece, but has nothing to do with them.
I was wondering when someone was going to bring this mushal, and I'm glad you did, Rabbi Jacobson, rather than me. But this idea of looking at a beautiful woman, or just pondering, let's say, your beloved in general. I mean, it's the perfect example because I mean, first of all, that's where we get the concept of love sick in the vernacular, in the common sense. And when you really love a woman, and it's then you want to be with her, part of her. I mean, we're two halves. We're supposed to be a whole. We want to merge. That's of course the sacred intimacy, is a manifestation of that. But I think it's a perfect example. I mean, of course, God is much greater than a woman, but as far as we can understand what
but no, absolutely correct. And as a matter of fact, love of man to woman comes from the love of man to God. It's because we are created in the divine image, and the man and woman were created as one, separated, and they want to long to cut back together to be one flesh, in the words of the Torah, and to be one with God again. So it's absolutely correct.
Yeah, Shkar. So thank you for bringing that up. I was afraid to say.
Well, I'll take it a step further. Shir HaShirim is all about a man and a woman, but we know it's a muscle for neshama and God. So that's the pasuk. Samchuni b'asheshes. The verses we're using here, Chelis Ava, comes from the woman's the romantic element of it, which we have to understand as being also only in a sacred way and our connection with God. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So to Eliezer's mashal, like if I see my wife, let's say she travels away for whatever reason, briefly to go do something with, and then I look at a picture of, or even if I'm at work and she's away from work and I look at a picture of her, like that's not satisfying. It helps, but it actually sometimes makes it worse. You miss the person even more. So, I mean, I think it's a really helpful mashal. And of course, looking at a piece of art, it was made for your vision. There's nothing more you're supposed to do with a piece of art. You can't eat it. You can't drink it. You look at it. That's what the artist made it for. So when you look at it, you're satisfied to the extent you can. You, at whatever level you appreciate art, you can appreciate it. Either just the beauty or the intelligence, the cleverness, the ideas can express. But that's the purpose for which the piece of art was created. The human being, though, was not created just for looking at it. A human being, especially a woman, in a special intimate relationship, it's like what you said. It's the best mashal, I think.
Yeah, well, look what would happen if, let's say, God said to Adam, "You can look at Chava, but you can't touch her." It would create quite frustration,
Look what the Nachash did. Look what the Nachash did.
What?
Look what the Nachash did.
Yeah. I would just add one more thing, just as an aside.
You mentioned about the Shir HaShirim. It's known by Chassidim, but Rabbi Isaac Homlier said that Shlomo HaMelech was not a Chassid, because if he would be a Chassid, he would not bring from a man and a woman. He would bring between a Chassid and a Rebbe.
I heard it a bit differently. Isaac Homlier, the Rebbe said this a number of times. I think he said that if he would have met, I don't know if that he wasn't a Chassid, if he would have met Chassidim, if he would have known Chassidim, he would have said the Moshe would have been from a Chassid to a Rebbe, not from man to woman. Yeah, correct. Actually, in Tovshin Tazai and Simchas Torah, the Rebbe told the story, and the Rebbe then kept saying back and forth to himself, "Should I tell the story? Should I not tell the story?" And because the Rebbe felt there'd be maybe a unique sachitzenim, and the Rebbe said Simchas Torah shat nicht. So he ultimately told the story, but the Rebbe went back and forth 3-4 times, tell the story, not tell the story, because didn't want anybody to misinterpret what it meant. But correct. I want to just add one thing since we're on the topic. It's really a tangent, but might as well say it. I've always wondered, and I spoke about this a number of times, why in Jewish tradition you find tremendous emphasis on sound, on music, on chazones, on nusach tefillah, on nigunim. You don't see the same equal obsession with art, Jewish art. So even though in the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash it was built beautifully, beautiful architecture and beautiful engraving and all of that, but throughout history, you don't see that the Gedolei Yisrael, I'm not talking about secular Jewish art, you don't see Gedolei Yisrael focus so much on art, even though I'm sure they had artistic skills. But yes, but composing the Gorim Levim, the Levim composed shirim and songs in Beis Hamikdash, etc. So the obvious reason is because of the halacha that you're not supposed to make an image of, especially of a person or anything that can be. In other words, it's a little like staying away from creating images that would be like a pesel, which is of course inappropriate. But we're not. But we're talking about art, even of art. Let's say of a horizon, not necessarily of people. So it could be that just to stay away, because art ultimately you'd have to have some people in it. Not even though you can stay and stick only to images of the sky and so on. So that's on a very basic level. But on a deeper level, I'm just thinking now as we're speaking, because Torah never wants to create something, an image. You want to have an image, think about God. Don't make images that you go to like a museum to watch someone else's beautiful rendition. Music and song is internal. When you hear a niggin, when you hear davening with a niggin, it elevates you. It actually quenches your thirst and makes you feel transcendent. But if it was done in a visual way, then what happens is visual by definition would be, like you said before with art, it remains, you know what? We're not here to observe, we're not observant Jews to observe beautiful images. We're here to internalize. So if you're gazing, l'istakle b'kara de malka, which we're going to learn soon, you're gazing at the beauty of godliness, and there you feel the thirst, that yes, because you want to connect with it. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that into the equation. The difference between watching something and experiencing something, basically. Okay, so let's continue. He's now going to discuss, so how do you reach this level of Riyah, which brings such a profound aching, longing, literally love sickness. So we're middle of page 1197. The line begins, Chulu, Uhu.
The Isser L'Sasa L'Cha Pesel, maybe we don't really find a parallel to it in sound.
No, not at all. Listen, you could have songs that are klippedika songs, impure songs, but that's a different story. That's not relevant to this. Okay. So the line after the parentheses, we said Valkenu b'chinas chelas hava. So now the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain, how do you come to this level of Riyah? What does it even mean? We know Hashem said to Moshe, no one can see me and live. So what Riyah are we talking about here? What kind of Riyah, sight or vision? So he says, V'hu kishem is beinin ba'alakus. And remember, this is more than just his bonus that we learned before, as bonus, Aricha says bonus and Hamakas Hadas. So he says here, when a person contemplates in the divine, in godliness, when a person contemplates on the divine power or the divine energy, he just says divine, let's call it the divine, the godliness within the world. In the power of Ein Sof, which God invested in creation. We're going to soon learn what that means, but basically both the very fact that God created existence, Yesh Ayin, the very fact that God sustains existence, that God perpetuates existence, that you find, as we learned earlier, the idea, for example, that the Tzva Shamayim, the celestial bodies, are always constantly and relentlessly moving without any weakening. Whatever the contemplation is about the divine within existence, b'keich Ein Sof, shebezeh sheyachal liyas b'bchinas riyah mamish.
B'koyach ha'Ein Sof shebozeh.
Oh, you're right. Sorry, correct. Hu kishmiz bein b'alakus shebe'elim b'keich Ein Sof shebezeh. The keich Ein Sof within the world. which this contemplation could be in a form of mamish riyah, not just conceptualizing. Literally riyah, how do we know? Like it says, raise your eyes upward to heaven, and see. The word is re'u, not Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which is Shema Shmiya. Re'u mibara ela. See who created all of this. So in other words, when you look at existence, you actually can see the divine, is what he's saying now. V'hainu, this means this means that bria v'yisavus hibekeyecha einsof, that the creation. The difference in Bria and Hisavas, Bria is usually refers to the actual Bria Yeshmai, but creation. Hisavas means to bring it into being. So it includes more than just Bria, it includes everything that came into existence. It's B'keich Ein Sof. It's with the infinite power of the divine. The Ilmole Miskanshin, this is a medrash. Kol ba elam eni mechem livre afil konaf yitush achas. Even if all the people of the world, all the dwellers of this universe, the entire population of the world would come together with gather, misconceptions like from the word knesses, knessia, they would gather together, they would not be able to create even one wing of a small insect, of a mosquito or an insect. Konef, not a wing. Forget about the whole insect. Even one wing. Just to emphasize, the famous, the classic story where a scientist is arguing with God and says, we don't need you anymore, because we can do whatever you can do. And God says, show me. So the scientist takes a piece of earth, like a clump of earth, and says, okay, I'll show you. I'm going to manipulate it. I'm going to inject it with some enzymes, and it's going to grow. So God says to him, yes, with all respect, use your own earth. In other words, it's very nice to take yesh mi yesh. Once it's in there, we can replicate it. And we can create tremendous technologies. No one's denying that. But you didn't create a yesh ma'ayin. Electricity, nuclear energy, atomic energy, quantum energy is all embedded in existence. No one created it. It was discovered, and we know now how to harness it and tap into it and generate it. But it's there from the beginning of time. So bottom line is, if all the people in the world came together, they couldn't even create one wing of an insect. So
in today's language, you would say not even one cell.
Yeah, one fiber, right? The Isavis Yesh Ma'ayin Ein Zeh B'chei Kanevroim Klal. Because to create something from nothing is not nechek. It's not even in the realm. It's not even in our chek. Could also be our rules, but basically in that which governs our existence. It's not in our power at all. Not like ilah v'olol, which is cause and effect. That means yesh mi yesh. She yesh negam ba'adam. We find ilah v'olol also by human beings. B'keiches haruchnim shalai, in his sublime or ethereal faculties, kamei b'seichel amidus, like seichel, intelligence and emotions, u'machshava v'dibur, and thought and speech. So a person thinks. From thought can evolve into speech. You don't need yesh ma'ayin there. You don't need a power of the divine. Once God created us a certain way, we also have a process of evolution. Miyesh miyesh. It evolves from the thought to speech, from the idea to emotions. And I remember I once speaking to a scientist, a very good guy, and he said to him, so look, all science does, explains how everything came from the Big Bang, and then how it evolved step by step, all beautiful. But I said that whatever was before the Big Bang, the dust, the particles, the electricity, whatever you want to call it, What does science have to say about that? What caused that to be? So he said very honestly, he says that's outside the domain of science. We can only go to where we see the beginning. It's like you can follow the river to the beginning, to the mouth of the river. And that's it. He says there comes a point where we can't speak about that because that's already the world of metaphysics. How did that first thing come there? So basically, in other words, once you have, it's like, I love this joke in Chelem, when one of the Chelem simple people came out from Chelem, he went to a big city, and they were just then, in the end of the 19th century, the steam engine, locomotives, trains began to be developed, and he was amazed. He never saw anything like this. Always, how does somebody travel? You have a carriage, and you have a horse, or several horses that are attached to the carriage, and here he sees these trains, they're just moving. So he came back to his town of Chelem, and he says, "It's a miracle. There's this vehicle, it moves, and there's no horse pulling it." They said, "How does it move?" So he says, "Because there's another car behind it that pushes it." He says, "Yeah, but what pushes that car?" He says, "Another car." And he keeps on saying, "Well, as far as I could see, I saw a bunch of cars." They said, "But what's pushing the last car?" He says, "That I couldn't figure out." So bottom line is, ilava alul, we see it all the time, in one form or another. But however, okay, avol yesh ma'ayin, lo yesh dugma lezeh ba'adam. Yesh ma'ayin, literally, that something does not have a identifiable source. When I say identify, I don't mean an invisible, that it came, and before there was no previous entity. There's no example for this in the human being. I know you may say, doesn't Chassidus say giving birth to a child is a form of a dugma yesh ma'ayin? It's a dugma for yesh ma'ayin. At the end of the day, there's a father and a mother, there's an egg and a seed, and you still need God to give a neshama. So it's a dugma of yesh ma'ayin because when you think about it, it's like unbelievable miracle. How a man and woman come together in a sacred way, and a seed fertilizes an egg, and suddenly you have pop, here we are, learning Ayin Beis 50, 40, 30 years later or whatever. So it's like a taste of yesh ma'ayin, but pure yesh ma'ayin is only in the domain of, only b'chek habeira is the expression, not b'chek hanivroim. Only God's domain and God's power to do so. So what do you see from this? So when su marmeinechem ru'umi bara ela, that when you look, you contemplate on existence. And as he says clearly, you can come to a state of looking at it. You can observe. You observe existence, and observing existence is an indicator. I'm sorry. No, he didn't. I didn't get back to Sumar Menechem. He's actually using since there's no yesh ma'ayin by humans. So I didn't read it correctly. The fact, just like by us, there's no yesh ma'ayin, only yesh miyesh. So this indicates shagam beruchnius, but madregas haruchnius lamaila, that also in the spiritual levels above, lo yesh bem inyan yesh ma'ayin. They also have no yesh ma'ayin, meaning yesh from an ayin rak ilav ol. Only cause and effect. Only one thing shaping and being reshaped or repurposed into something else.
Can I ask a question?
What?
What is it? At what point does he bring out? This is things that he said in volume 1 and volume 2, but specifically, why is he bringing this down now and repeating himself?
I don't see any repeat at all. He's speaking here about how witnessing with your eyes is going to create a deep yearning and thirst that's going to cause chelas ava. That's the theme here.
Okay, I got it. Okay.
That's where this is going. So yes, some of these ideas were mentioned, but you could ask that about a lot of Ayin Beis. So he's tying it together to the avodah of what this Riyah elicits in us. Just for the record, this was also mentioned in volume 1. You want to know, in chapter 175, I believe. No, not 175. No, I know it's Mates Ayin Daled. If you want to look in volume 1, since you already brought it up, page. What page is it? A little later. The idea of Chela Sava was mentioned already, briefly, similar to what we learned here. Okay, a second. Yeah. I'm sorry, it was chapter 275, not 175, 275. So if you look there in the middle of the page, or closer to the bottom, he speaks how Riyah brings to Chelas Ava. Page, there's page 558, volume 1. Okay, just as a cross-reference, fine. So since there's no yesh ma'ayin, not above, not below, and not above, that's why by a person there's no yesh ma'ayin. Because the human being encompasses both more spiritual elements and physical elements. It's an interesting addition here. So therefore, that which exists in El Yenim also is by a person. So since we don't find in El Yenim either Yesh Ma'ayin, and a person is made up of El Yenim and Tachtenim, we don't find the concept of Yesh Ma'ayin in a human being. The Inyan Yesh Ma'ayin Shalei Nimtza Gamba Medreges Aruchim in El Yenim Al Kain Le Nimtza Ba'Adam. I'm not sure why he needs to add all this. He said already that we don't have Yesh Ma'ayin, only Ilav Ol. Also above, there's no Yesh Ma'ayin. Since a human is made from above and below, we don't have Yesh Ma'ayin. Not sure. I mean, I understand the addition. I'm not sure why it's so critical to add. What would be missing if he didn't say this? Maybe he's trying to qualify that you may think that we may not, the human being may not have Yesh Ma'ayin because we're made up of physical matter. But if we also, since we also have spiritual strengths, meaning El Yenim, then maybe we do. Now that you say El Yenim don't have Yesh Ma'ayin, so even that aspect also. Maybe that's what he means, not positive. Okay, upon him, that's what he's saying. And since there's no, so bottom line, so now going back to the beginning of the statement, so when you see Yesh Ma'ayin, it's very clear. It's only in the power of Ein Sof, of the Eibishter. Only he has the capacity to create something that has no beginning, so to speak, no previous state. Now, of course, you could say, what do you mean? God is the previous state, but we learned that Ayin means that's not of the same substance. When you took Machshava and Dibur, or you're talking about everything after the Big Bang, or B'Seichel Midas, so they're different properties, but they're both made of certain ingredients. When you take ingredients, you make a cake. So yes, the cake is a new cake, but the ingredients were not new. So in that context, to say that there's nothing that precedes this yesh in the sense besides the power of God, and the ayin, as we learned, is both not understood by us and also like non-existential from our perspective, that is only b'keich Ein Sof. Oh boy, okay. So I see he's not, I thought he's going to be going back now. He's now going to qualify. What about Malchus? Don't we learn in Chassidus that Malchus has the power to create? Malchus creates Biyah. So he's going to explain that Malchus is only because in its root, it's coming from the Koyach Ein Sof is manifesting through Malchus. But I think we should stop here because it's not a two-line I see. It's a whole section here. But bottom line, the Rebbe Rashab is leading us into that through looking and gazing, ru'u, seeing, re'iyah, into existence, we actually can see godly power. Now, I know you could argue, one second, we don't see that godly energy. We just see the result of the godly energy. So I think we should discuss that once we learn it inside, what he means exactly. So in other words, we're right now in the middle of understanding what does Re'iyah mean? What does it mean to see? Since he made the point that Re'iyah is more than contemplation, so what does Ru'u Mibara Eila add over the contemplation that you know there's divine energy in existence? Clearly the pasuk is saying Ru'u Mibara Eila. There's something you can actually see. So he's not clear. We don't have clarity on that. So far he's not clear.
Right now in the spring, when you see how the trees are blossoming, you see it with your own eyes.
Yeah. But Pashtus right now, Riyah means, but Riyah is the product of the Koyach Eliki. You don't see the Eliki. That's what I'm trying to say. But I agree with you that if you stare at it long enough, you start saying this is godliness at work, basically. That's what Pashtus how he's explaining it. But
you could imagine that in the winter about how it looks in the spring, but when you see it in reality, it's different.
Yeah, but we're going to learn. We're going to learn it inside. He's going to explain what Riyah means, and ultimately the Chaylasav. Listen, it's going to require the best proof that we're not there yet is because we're not aching with love sickness. If we actually saw it properly, it would probably cause that. Okay. Fine. Let's stop here. We're moving our way down page 1197. And anybody want to ask anything? Any comments? Okay.
Did you have a chance to see Torah visuals, Rabbi Jacobson? I put it up on